Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app.
How can I find the stability needed for long-term success? By investing with the world's largest active fund manager, who oversees over $2.3 trillion worldwide, adapting and growing across the globe, with more than 340 long-standing portfolio managers and analysts that have earned unrivaled access to the companies they invest in. Can I find a firm that values long-term stability like I do? With Capital Group, I can.
Welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and today I'm joined by Adam Crabbe. G'day, Adam.
Hi, Fraser.
Thanks for joining me today. Now, today we're here to talk about, quite a few different things actually, but really around the concept of client connection. And obviously the company that you work with has done a lot of research into this, of course, and what we might do is talk about all that research. There's a white paper, there is focus reports, all these sorts of things that I've had a look at, and some presentations that you've done on it. So thank you for joining me today. Before we get into it, I might just quickly start with you. Who are you and why are we talking together?
Yes, so look, it's fantastic to be with you. So who am I? I'm a risk strategy specialist. I'm a bit of an insurance guru, if you like, and have been with Zurich for just over 3 years. I've always had a passion for wealth protection and protecting people's, their finances, their family, and this particular client connection piece is really an extension of that. One of the things that I like to do is try and find opportunities where if there is a bit of a gap in terms of an offering something that could really enhance that financial advisor client relationship, that's something that I really like to try and hone in on and make come to life. So it ultimately benefits not just the advisor, but the community at large.
Yeah, fantastic. Helping people. I love it. It's sort of a shared passion of mine, so they're very good. So tell us about this piece, and obviously you did some research. When I say we, because XY community was involved in some way. Do you want to tell us about research that happened?
Yeah, so we sort of knew instinctively that financial planners were doing a lot more than, I dare say, just providing financial planning advice, which obviously is critical, but we got a sense that there was a lot more going on. We sort of heard anecdotally that, advisors were kind of becoming an extension of the client's family in some ways, going to barbecues and weddings, even funerals. And we thought, well, what is actually happening? What's going on? And is that providing a broader betterment to the financial planning relationship and even the tenure of that client? And so we sort of went down the track of trying to really find out how much and to what extent. So we were really fortunate to reach out to the XY advisor community, and what we found was quite revolutionary. Just the level of engagement that advisors are having beyond that traditional financial planning mold. It was elements around certainly how much of what you're doing is outside that traditional. And over 90%, Fraser was saying that, yes, their role is kind of almost morphing into things like coaching and counselling. And even with that, we thought, wow, well, what is it that is going on? What's happening? What are you talking about? And a lot of this then drove us into understanding that things like emotion, there was a lot of emotional interactions that was happening, which, as we know, is driving a lot of clients to become more forthcoming in the sorts of information that they divulge, almost sort of lets the guard down. Around 70% of advisors apparently now being told a secret by their client, and apparently the financial advisor is the only person that this particular client has actually divulged that secret to, which my mind was blown when I found that. I was like, wow, there's such a level of trust. And this kind of opened up the doorway to, because apparently one of the most common things that's discussed from a non-financial perspective was health. It was lifestyle. It was stuff happening outside of work. So that really started off part of the process to exploring this client connection and the research behind it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that, the lifestyle financial planning. Obviously, I've talked about goals and values-based advice for many years, really getting down to these, what are, some of your goals and values and passions and beliefs and the things that you like to do every day that aren't necessarily just about saving money or investing money or spending money. Obviously, money has a small piece to do with it because it's all intertwined, but it's really around looking at a client as a human being and saying, what are the things that drive you and motivate you to do. So, it's been a massive, thing that I've loved to follow as well. So I just really resonate with that word, the secret. That's, being divulged a secret.
Yes, it was incredible. Just the notion that people are really quite open to talking about themselves, who they are, and really opening that door to someone's soul in a way. And you think about any other industry or profession, I can't think of any that are like that. I mean, even, we're finding out now that financial advisors are knowing a lot more than even their own doctors. It's far more than just health. It's money. It's goals, dreams, wishes. It's aspirations. It's income, and even from the XY advisor findings, it's extending into things like addiction issues, to conflicts with children, to marital issues, which obviously have significant impacts to someone's, finances, but also significant impacts to their mental health, their emotional well-being, and it was startling. But one of the things that we've tried to do is kind of capture and gravitate this data and make it valuable in terms of how we approach that from a financial planning lens, from an advice value add. And that's why we've come out with each of these different, not just the white paper, but the focus report. So it's data into what it is that people are doing, the sorts of things that is driving them to, to work hard, to provide for their families, and then the emotional or almost the therapeutic value that advice offers to that client relationship. And then practical tools of what advisors can do to implement change, to use some of the insights from some of these, new ways of thinking into their own business model.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just from that high level, before we get into the nitty gritty of the research, the idea of an advisor creating a financial plan, which is, obviously around right now, and then projecting it forward into the future, relies so heavily on that, the human behaviors, the health, the well-being, the lifestyle, that if you're not doing that, I guess my point is, if you're not doing that part of the process, then the financial plan is never going to be right. It's going to be always going to just, be derailed by something else.
Yeah, that's very true. And look, I think, and as we know, look, it's probably stuff that advisors are doing instinctively, but it's a case of really leveraging their value off that. So really opening up the discussion, and then that in turn is actually having significant benefits to that longer term relationship.
Yep, fantastic. Now, so let's start with the white paper. Tell us about the white paper. That's sort of the main piece of this.
Yes, it is. So, look, I'm a bit of a data junkie, Fraser, so I love the insights. I love the data. And when we understood or kind of realized that what people are doing from a non-financial perspective was so critically important, we sort of dug deep and found some fairly recent government data, Australian government data, just on the sorts of activities that people are doing, be they, recreation, hobbies, leisure. And from that, it kind of painted a bit of a picture in terms of what it is that Australians, we love doing. I mean, anecdotally, we're such an active nation, but trying to find out what it is that we're doing, and then coupled with that, the mental health benefits, particularly as many of us, come out of a, COVID lockdown. I'm sure there are many clients out there that are just looking forward to nothing more than getting back to doing what they truly love to do. And we kind of know that we don't just love it, but it's good for us, good for our soul. But of course, there are risks inherent in what we do. And, even if it's something as, trivial as going for a walk, some of this data and some of the research that we've uncovered is that there are actually risks in that. And what we've managed to do, interestingly, is quantify the different activities that people are doing and overlay that with certain risks, so that if an advisor was to chat to someone and say, hey, I'm thinking about taking up soccer or basketball or rugby league, we've actually built tools that enable advisors to say, well, actually, look, yes, that's fantastic, and here are some of the insights into the mental health benefits, but it's probably worth just discussing some of the risks and how they compare to other sports or leisure activities or hobbies. And of course, that can then lend into that broader discussion of appropriateness, product selection, and if it's something that the clients are comfortable in undertaking from a risk perspective.
Yeah, it's certainly a massive piece, and you do interlay those those activities. And as we look at those activities, let's jump into them, because some of them are a little bit more risky than others.
Yes, they are.
And so you've gone into some of those activities and said, well, look, we really need to sort of think about what they can do, not just obviously from a risk product point of view, because we're not sort of talking about product today, but from a lifestyle, how's this going to affect your lifestyle? What are the things that we need to think about from a risk assessment point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you're 100% right. When we uncovered part of this data research, we found that there was some of the hobbies that people are doing are quite significantly high risk. So some of the more common ones around recreational walking, fitness, gym, jogging, swimming are probably some of the more commonplace type activities. And some people listening, I'm like, yes, that certainly resonates with me. But when we look at some of the more common or perhaps less common type pursuits, things like push bike riding, even soccer, surfing, cricket, some of these type of sports are actually quite high on the risk spectrum. And when I say risk, one of the things that we wanted to understand was what are the risks of hospitalization that happens off the back of some of these events, because typically those sorts of things are quite impactful. Suddenly people can stop work very short notice, and do they have liquid assets that they can get access to at very short notice? But being able to articulate this information from a financial advisor to a client, we felt that the information just wasn't there. But with some of the planners that we piloted this particular program through, the information we got was that they felt it would be quite valuable to have access to something which they could use to say, well, look, yes, oh, you do bike riding, that's fantastic, but are you aware of the chance of something happening to you, and what that risk looks like compared to, say, simply going for a walk or playing netball, or like I do, my pursuit is jumping on the back of a motorcycle. So yes, mine tends to be a bit high risk, but then having put a bit of a playing field to articulate, well, how do these sports and leisure pursuits compare from a risk perspective?
And obviously you did some work on the idea around cost of care and cost of recovery. Talk a little bit about that, but also tell us your story around your motorcycling addiction.
Yes. So look, on the cost of care, one of the things that that particular program of work, and look, it wasn't just me behind that, but someone I know the XY family knows very well, Danny Visser, amazing. So together we really tried to answer that question as to what, illnesses and injuries cost across Australia. And one of the findings from the cost of care was that in terms of the total cost impacts of the total health spend across Australia, injuries actually sat at number 2. So they were the second most costly type event, if you like, happening in Australia today. So that was, in a way, part of the genesis for the client connection piece of work, was to understand, well, let's just explore that injury subsegment just a little bit more. And that's kind of led us in part to where we are. But yes, with my own sort of situation and circumstance, yes, there's sort of risk inherent in everything. But around a year ago, my leisure pursuit ended up seeing me in hospital for a spell. In fact, I was in a high dependency ward for a short period of time. So I was involved in an accident. It was only a relatively sort of low speed type accident. But I since found out my, orthopedic surgeon mentioned that they're often some of the most dangerous in terms of risk to limb, as it were. So yeah, involved in an accident, had about 6 to 7 broken ribs. I shattered my right shoulder blade, my scapula, and was off work for 3 months. So this was obviously quite dramatic, quite painful, and kind of landed me in a situation of, well, how will I fare in this particular situation? And honestly, one of the great surprises off the back of that was, despite the fact that I'm quite financially literate, obviously I understand insurance products perhaps better than average, was that even in my own situation, despite the fact that I had great support in, a family, a wife, I was getting physiotherapy care, I was speaking to GPs, medical specialists, surgeon, as I mentioned, I felt there was something missing, Fraser. And, in my situation, and one of the things I found out afterwards, after doing some independent research, was that it's actually very common that people in situations where an accident happens, even illnesses are suffered, is that they need direction. They need something that, GPs, medical specialists, even family and friends can typically not provide. And that is someone to keep you on track from a financial perspective. So really, one of the things that I felt was that, and perhaps what was lacking in my situation, was that assistance from my advisor to help make sure that, money's coming in regardless of the source, whether it's from an insurance contract or a motor accident claim, workers' compensation, whatever the illness or injury. And that even despite the fact that something has happened and taken people off track from what was their financial, plan or strategy, that the advisor is there to just kind of keep track of what you're doing. So really with the client connection piece, what I've done here is include some of the ways in which a financial advisor can actually help, even if someone is not a client necessarily. Some of the piloted planners are actually saying they're actually getting referrals from people who weren't their own clients, but purely for the fact that they're actually there helping people from an advocacy perspective. It's such a valuable resource that people are not only paying for that particular service, but willing to recommend people because it kind of lifts the ethical bar somewhat. But often some of the planners we spoke to were saying, well, how do you do that? What are some of the ways in which you can help people when something happened? Like, surely there's just too many people around, medical people and family and friends. But, the short answer is no. There really is a significant opportunity for an advisor to actually step in and keep people on track, make sure that they're liaising with medical specialists. How is their recovery going? Their rehabilitation? What plans are they undertaking? One of the great things that helped me was tracking my milestones. So everything from how many medications I was taking each day. In the early stages, it was around 20 to 25 different pills each day. One of my goals was to get off them as quickly as possible. I hate taking, tablets and things. So every week I would just kind of, jot down, how many I could manage and reduce that. And, that's something I think the advisor could be party to is, well, what are you on track with? What's that looking like? For me, it was lifting weights, being able to hold a phone to my ear. I think it was around 6.5 weeks before I could actually lie flat and sleep back in my bed. So it's often these little things around, well, what are those little progress milestones? Are we on track? And is it something that is really driving someone? And, from an emotional and mental perspective, it was such a valuable thing to do because I was able to track where I was and how much better I was doing, even, almost on a daily basis.
It's incredible. So obviously, off the back of you, that's your personal story, right? Because you look at this in two sides. You look at it from the personal story that you've been through, and as you mentioned, the emotional and mental states and things that helped you recover. And then you've got the medical stuff that helped you recover, and then you've got the financial side of it. So obviously, you'll be able to see this from the inside looking out as well as the outside looking in.
Yes.
One of the stats that came out was 60. You were one of 60,000 other Australians that year that was hospitalised because of their sports and leisure injuries. But I want to get into some of these ways to help because, tracking the milestones was one way to help. As you mentioned, well, I think if I look around the country, I've spoken to a lot of risk specialists over time that put a lot into that claims process, have a whole, structure and process around helping clients through that. It suits, everything with regards to setting some goals and milestones and then helping a client track it along the way. it doesn't necessarily involve a statement of advice from a financial planner to be able to help a client during this claims process. Tell us about what you see as some of the other ways that advisors can help during this time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And what's interesting with a lot of the planners that we've spoken to, and not just off the back of this particular piece of work, but across many years, is really trying to find ways in which, and I don't want to use the word capitalizing, but how some advisors are really transforming the way they give advice off the base of the value add that they provide, particularly in that claims or even non-claims advocacy space. So some practices have, I suppose, taken stock on even some of the simple things they do. So, the question that they've asked themselves and their team is, what do we have in place if a client or perhaps a client's partner, spouse was to call us and say something's happened? Is it a case of, like you said, you don't necessarily need to jump into, a statement of advice mode, but is it just making sure that they have the support that they need? Some planning firms have a claims kit, something that they can just, get access to, almost like a bit of a checklist for some of the staff, because some of the advice firms, they're in such, rural or regional areas that, the staff themselves are really well known to the clients and the community, so they can actually take quite an active step in assisting, reporting back with the client situation, in some cases discussing with family members. So there's certainly an element to that. One of the fears, though, from some of the advisors that were just sort of jumping into this stage was a fear that they didn't know enough to be able to provide assistance and support. But really, some of the leading advisors in this space, Fraser, and you may be across this yourself, is that they're not experts. They don't need to be experts. They can rely on others. They can simply be that port of call, helping them direct, almost project manage in a way. If people are not feeling themselves, then helping them to direct them towards a GP, a psychologist, a counsellor, social worker, just making sure that money's in the bank, making sure that they're getting the help that they need, is often those small steps, but really, really valuable ones. Just knowing that there's that kind of care factor. And as we talked earlier, clients are, giving themselves really to a lot of advisors, particularly around that stuff we talked about, addiction issues, conflicts with kids, marital issues. So there's almost an expectation that if something goes wrong, that advisors are there to sort of be involved. And it's not necessarily to a degree that requires that statement of advice, that written record, but just to be there, to talk them through, to make sure that they're checking in, even if it's a 5-minute conversation once a week or once a fortnight. It just provides such a significant difference to that planner-client relationship.
Yeah, I really like the term care factor actually that you mentioned, and because you're right, there could be a fear involved in, look, I'm not a therapist, I don't want to step on toes, I don't want to be, but I think we kind of are as planners. They are in a way a therapist, and because just by sitting and listening, it can create great therapy for the client. So, look,
100%.
I like the idea of using that. Am I demonstrating that we care? Like, is there a care factor involved? Does the client feel that we care because of the way that we're going through this? But I think that's really interesting, and putting some checklists around the concept of how do we help in all those areas, and are we checking in to make sure that the client's emotional state or mental state or their other parts of their life is recovering and on track. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if planners are looking for more, we've included that as part of this client connection work. So you mentioned the milestones. Look, for me, that was significant. Some of the other data and research we uncovered was advisors should be talking to clients and saying, look, try and avoid making major decisions or big life changes, at least until you feel better. Even if someone is physically impaired, sometimes that can really translate to their mental incapacity, and, maybe getting to people just to sort of focus on their recovery, even things like making time for regular exercise, if that's at all possible, helping get people to a little bit back to normality before making significant decisions, is often actually welcomed at a later stage. Some of the feedback we've got has been clients saying, well, we were so grateful because, looking back, that really wasn't the right decision to make. I wasn't in the right headspace. So just some of those small things can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. So now's not the time. In other words,
Yes.
we need to do some, obviously, let's say you've had a payout or you've got something. Now's not the time to do it. We just settle down, we wait, and then when you've mentally and physically recovered, then we make some long-term decisions.
To take those small steps. One of the interesting facts I found was that, particularly with physiotherapists, it's obviously a very physical type role, manipulating muscles, around 90% of a physiotherapist's role is actually mental. So if their patients and clients are not mentally prepared to get better, it really doesn't matter how much manipulation these physiotherapists do. It's not likely to be as dramatic. People need to be mentally geared up, even for physical betterment, as it were. So, it's really, you can't underestimate the power of someone being mentally in the right headspace, even for something like the physical repair that people and medical professionals actually work with.
Yeah, I kind of feel that very much the same way about financial plans. I feel like 10% of them is the numbers, and 90% of them is the mental state that somebody's willing to do the work, because it's all sets and reps, right? You've still got to do some work to implement it. Fantastic. So as we dig into the white paper, obviously we've got the concept around how how these things all work together, and then we can go into some of the items like we just went through and setting up some claims services. What are some of the other things that advisors can take away from the white paper?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're noticing is that, and part of the last of the reports, the Value Beyond the SOA report that we published, it looks at some of the ways some planners have actually made changes in the way that they're giving advice. Some have decided to sort of pivot their practice from the front end, so the way that they are engaging from a fact-find perspective. Others have actually used some of the information from an ongoing perspective. So what we've done in that final report is really provide a bit of a practical or series of practical ways that some of the planners have actually decided to utilise the insights. So we really wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about like the data and the numbers. While it's interesting and useful, how you can actually make a change, make a difference in your business. So that was certainly one in terms of that back office type approach. Others have actually.
So if we go into that, sorry, can I just dive into that? So
sure.
The practical ways, as you mentioned, some of them have implemented that forward-looking thing in a new way of like rethinking their advice process.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And even the remuneration, Fraser. So part of dipping the toe into this kind of area, and actually some planners that we've spoken to have done this from a pro bono perspective, just to kind of give them a bit of an upskill in terms of what it's like to interact with people that are going through sort of traumatic events, is that they've got processes in place that they're able to articulate their value add and be able to apply a cost overlay for that. And it's interesting to see some of the businesses that are doing that from a non-claims perspective. So these are practitioners who may not be overly, insurance savvy, and they don't need to be, because what they're doing is providing that differentiation through these stages of, recovery, rehabilitation, and being able to apply their own value in that framework. So, some planners have actually shifted their entire business model to engage just on claims advocacy and non-claims advocacy. Now, we're not suggesting certainly other advisors do that, but, if they're not utilising their, after claims skill set, which for many might just kind of be a sleeper, we do see that as a significant opportunity, one which could not only enhance that relationship, but actually provide a financial benefit to that particular business.
Well, okay, so check out some of the reports if you want to dive a bit deeper into that. Now, one of the things I want to cover off is the concept that just getting advice is actually a therapy.
Yes, look, it's true. It was almost one of those instinctive things which we kind of knew, but we wanted to find out just how much of a difference it makes. And the second of our focus reports goes into the real psychology of advice and that sort of therapeutic value you mentioned. And what we've uncovered is that clients are more open, they're more willing to divulge, willing to engage, and more receptive to the value of advice. And what we're finding is that the part of that psychology of advice is that exploring the non-financial aspects means that planners are more ingrained in that kind of family or client network. And it's extending into things like, mortgage brokers and accountants, solicitors, because it's not just about, cash flow, retirement planning. It's everything that the client, their family, their spouse are doing. They want to include that advisor to make sure that they are maximising just not only their financial benefit, but their almost their life benefit, if that makes sense. So it's a case of trying to extend the benefit into greater communication. So we're finding even one of the interesting bits of research was that the value that the financial advisor is providing is actually having a betterment to the communication between husband, wife, or client and spouse. Like it's significant because it's just open, it's clearing the air, and money is such an important part of what makes up a family dynamic. It's extending to different elements of that particular situation. Some advisors are becoming mediators between family and extended family members. Like it's having flow-on effects to other areas, some of which is quite surprising.
Yeah, so I really want to dive into this sort of section because I think it's really important. So a part of the survey was a dive into the concept of how much time would an advisor spend actually talking about financial advice during a conversation, and how much time was sort of spent with sort of non-financial issues. Tell us about some of those conversations.
Yeah, it was quite startling. It certainly in the early days, I think financial planning is built on that sort of financial strength, the technical knowledge, expertise, but really that is starting to shift, and it is extending into these sort of non-financial areas, and it's becoming, as you've alluded to, it's kind of becoming almost a core part of the discussions that they're having with their clients. But what's interesting is their business is increasing. So part of the data we've got, when we sort of reached out and surveyed through the XY advisor community, we found that 45% of advisors agreed their business had increased, and 28% had strongly agreed that their business has increased purely because of allocating their time to non-financial issues, because it's extending into really what are the core values of that individual, and that is becoming a significant differentiator, because there are no other professions really that engage in that non-financial area as much. In fact, one firm we spoke to, they've aligned their business model with an accountability overlay. And what it's meaning is that even from like a cash flow type perspective, they're kind of checking in on their clients quite regularly just to make sure that they're hitting the milestones, hitting the mark. And what they're finding is they're getting a lot of referrals from what I would call non-traditional strategic alliances, like personal trainers, those that have a similar, mindset around, health, well-being, accountability. And they're finding that there's a similar profession that's doing it from a financial perspective. So it's one which is starting to shift the way I think people in the community see financial planning, but also the value that they offer.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting thing. Over the last few years, I've talked about the concept of, we had a legislation coming, talked about fee for service, and I want to get into the way that advisors charge for their advice at the moment. Then we sort of moved to the concept of fee for advice, and obviously, if somebody's getting financial advice, that's what we charge for. When I look at all the different things, the roles a financial advisor plays, whether it's therapy or goal setting or helping track milestones and the strategic financial advice and then the product advice are the two parts that really fall under the SOA type conversation. But there are so many other parts that an advisor is doing that they're not necessarily charging for, because all the charging or the fees is locked up in that advice and product advice and strategic advice around the conversation. So if we think about that from a point of view of how do we start charging for these non-financial advice parts of our business? How do we do it?
Yeah, it's not easy. I think for people who are really looking to ingrain this cost element into their business, I would suggest starting with the financial. So, if it's, and I think to many in terms of financial planning, it's probably a natural start. So is it a case of understanding more about the superannuation environment, for example? So, if something's happening to someone, can they get access to their super benefits, be they TPD or income protection? Maybe extending that into, compulsory third party or motor accident type claims. And in fact, the Client Connection, one of the things that we've done is we've developed some fact sheets, state and territory based fact sheets, because part of the feedback we got was that many planners were really unaware of how state-based and territory-based motor accident claims work. So we've provided little fact sheets that talk to, who is covered, are at-fault drivers covered, what's the tax implications. So it's not something that they necessarily to give out to clients, but something that they can keep in their arsenal as part of their value add from a financial perspective. So, of course, there's that, which we've included. Even things like offset treatment is becoming more topical. So if, and I know we're not talking product necessarily, but if someone has an income protection type policy and something happens to them, and maybe there's an entitlement to things like sick leave or long service leave or annual leave, holiday pay. So part of the advisors working in that advocacy space are actually utilising that as part of their offering, just to talk through, what their entitlement is likely to be based on the quality of their contract, if the policy is inside super, if it's in a group super policy or outside of super. So I think the financial element is probably a natural place to start. And from that, they can then extend their value and therefore the cost that they can apply to that non-financial element. So it may be a case of, being able to articulate, well, with our clients that go through these particular events, we reach out to them every, month to 2 months or every fortnight or every week. We liaise with certain providers. So just kind of being that conduit, helping someone to project manage or direct them into a certain professional, and being the go-to for any, concerns, questions that particular individual may have.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think there is a lot of information that advisors could add to the question sets when in that pre-space as well, of trying to find, like when you're having conversations with clients, are they doing what recreational activities are they doing, and getting that information in things like, are they doing cycling and soccer and sports, or are they doing what are their activities? Talk to me about how you can think advisors can incorporate that into their practices.
Yeah. Interestingly, the part of the feedback we've received is that it's playing an increasing role regardless of age. So even planners that may have, say, a predominantly retiree database, so not typically like an insurance focused or anything like that, they're finding that they're using the tool in that environment, because many of these people who are maybe approaching retirement haven't had time to do something, and are now entertaining the idea of, maybe I'm thinking of doing golf or tennis, and is it something that I should do, or is it something that others are doing? And one of the things that we've built in our sports and injury leisure tool is not just the risks inherent, but the participation rate across other people of that particular age. So, financial advisors can now sit down and say, well, actually, yes, in terms of, tennis, and for people your age, there's a certain demographic or percentage of people that are actually undertaking that particular pursuit. So that can actually help them, again, from a non-financial perspective, perhaps be able to build a social network for their activity that they're undertaking. So we're hearing that that's actually providing an interesting value add, something which we didn't necessarily think would be of value, but it's one that's opening up that greater engagement piece once again. So yeah, participation rate, we've managed to break it down into certain genders and age groups, and across many of the different key pursuits and activities. So that's kind of like a bit of a fun interactive tool that advisors can play around with.
And just on that fun and interactive tool, where can they find that?
So that's a good question. So to get access to the tool, the financial fact sheets, what advisors, what you'll need to do is reach out to your Zurich and OnePath contact. The white papers, so the white papers, the focus reports, we do have them available online. So if you go to, I don't know if I just give you the website address, Fraser.
Sure.
So it's zurich.com.au/the client connection. And you simply just, click on I think it's like a button on the right-hand side that says get your copy today, and you'll get access to the reports. For the additional tools, if you just reach out to your respective contact, they'll make sure that they get access to that.
Yeah, now you mentioned reports as in plural. So there is actually the main white paper, as we talked about, which is I think it's a 44-odd page white paper.
Correct.
And then there are 2 focus reports as well.
That's right. So the white paper we've called Lessons in Leisure. So it talks through what are the pursuits that people are doing, the benefits of doing that from a health perspective, but also the risks involved. The second report, the Advisor Focus Report, which we've called the Hidden Therapeutic Value of Advice, really talks to the significant value that financial advice offers from that, psychology and emotional aspect. So that was largely driven off the back of part of the incredible findings through the XY advisor community, but understanding, people's not just their financial affairs, but their non-financial, the issues people are having, the significant value and improvements that people have with their lives through engaging with a financial advisor. And the third report, which is our practice focus report, which we've called Value Beyond the SOA, really is the practical tools that advisors are doing, the shifts they've done in the way that they are providing advice, and gives actual examples of how advisors can implement some of these changes as part of their day-to-day.
Yep, and obviously I like stats and numbers too. So off the back of some of those reports, I'm just looking at a line in front of me that says, 50% of Australians receiving financial advice reported their mental health had improved as a result. And 38 reported their family life was better. Isn't it interesting, these benefits of financial advice that we don't list as a benefit?
Absolutely, and it's significant, and from part of the trends, it's only increasing. So it's providing a significant differentiator to people's lives for those that actually choose to engage with a financial planner.
Yeah, the whole better position conversation comes up, and when I think about that, everybody always comes back to a financial better position. Yes,
but it's a lifestyle better position. They're more financially prepared, but mentally, emotionally, their sense of purpose is more defined. Like, it's quite significant. And look, if you haven't read the papers, for those listening, I'd certainly urge them to pick them up, have a read, and hope they provide a real value add to them and their business.
Yeah, I feel like a practical, off the back of reading these papers and doing something about it in your business, could be the scenario where you're actually asking some, qualitative questioning before the client comes in around how they feel about certain stuff, and then asking those questions after they've received the advice and be able to track that improvement.
Yeah, true. And in fact, some clever ways that some advisors are telling us they're doing that is they're kind of introducing that, tried and tested, boring, if you like, fact find, F&A, to the client, saying, this is, how we kind of get the data, etc. But they'll slide it to one side and then just say, but, tell me about you. What are you looking to achieve? What's keeping you up at night? It's those sorts of more open-ended, non-financial type questions, which then start the ball rolling. It's almost like the fact find then becomes almost incidental. So it's quite incredible.
Mm. So some of those questions, I'm trying to, the answer I'm thinking is on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you now? And then being able to ask those questions after and show the improvement.
Yeah, 100%. And using almost that scale, you could ask them, in 12 months, 24 months time, if we're sitting here again, how can we shift that dial? What would mean an improvement of a 6 or 7 today to make it a 9 or 10 in 12 or 24 months time? And it really gets those clients and potential clients thinking about what it is that they'd like to do. And it's actually having, for some practices, what we've understood is it's really extending the fact-finding journey from a single meeting to maybe multiple meetings, so that they can really garner proper insights into an individual, which is obviously then transforming into better advice for that person.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, thanks for coming and chatting with us today. Really appreciate your time and sharing your story and your insights with us, and obviously some of the stats that came off the back of the XY community.
It's been my pleasure, Fraser. Thank you, and thanks to the XY advisor community for their assistance with the project.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of the XY Advisor podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and I'm with Emily Blanche. Hey, Emily.
Hey, Fraser. How are you
I'm
today?
amazing. As you know, I always say I'm tremendous. I was going to say tremendous again, but thought I better not. Hey, we're here to do some shout-outs, the best part of the week for us. So who are we going to shout out today?
Yes, so big shout-out to XY advisor Ellie Fordham for making her debut television appearance on the project recently. So if you missed it, Ellie took a group of millennials through a series of questions around how they're engaging with their super in particular, and to demonstrate the long-term impact the decisions they make today will have on their financial futures. It was pretty eye-opening, actually. It was really great to watch, and it just really highlighted the value of making smart money decisions, and Ellie really brought that to the table and absolutely crushed it. And it also highlighted the value of what an advisor can bring to consumers and to a client's life. So well done, Ellie. There was so much love for you on LinkedIn on this, and very well deserved. It was amazing.